Hopefully you just watched the first slide, the first 9 slides of this presentation. Note that growth spurts are really important. Girls are gaining about 18 pounds around the age of 12. Boys are gaining 20 pounds around the age of 13 to 14. We're having a large growth spurt that follows childhood, where it ends for girls with the onset of menarche, and it ends a couple years later for boys. Girls are gaining weight and growing in their hips. Guys are gaining more broader shoulders. Boys are developing angular faces. Girls, softer or rounder faces. They're getting taller. They're maturing and their faces are changing. There are psychological dimensions of puberty. Girls may have a more negative body image than boys. Early maturation in boys, they're bigger, stronger, more built, more muscular, so they tend to take that in a good way. Whereas earlier maturation in girls, it leads to more delinquency, smoking, drinking, hanging out with an older crowd because you look older than all of your same age peers, and that can be a risk factor. That's not good. For cognitive development, we're getting into formal operations. Remember the black and white thinking, yes or no, black, white, it's right or it's wrong. Now thinking is becoming more flexible and it's less dependent on perceptions and past experiences. So make sure you take a look at deductive reasoning, inductive reasoning, hypothetical reasoning, and scientific inductive reasoning, and make sure you know the definition of each of those four. We've also got some cognitive traits of adolescence. There is the personal invincibility fable. They kind of believe they're immune to harm or injury, so they may take more risks. They do feel like they have an imaginary audience. They believe that everyone's obsessed and consumed with their behavior. Oh my God, I have a pimple. Everyone's going to know. If I don't have the right outfit on, nobody's going to talk to me. And pseudo-stupidity is interpreting situations as more complex than they really are. There's a question of whether everyone reaches formal operations, and really and truly, they may not. The way Piaget sets it out is that if you get to adolescence, you get to formal operations. That may not be the case. Vygotsky's theory, he puts knowledge in a situational and collaborative environment. So he takes a social constructivist approach. He says that the social context of learning and the construction of knowledge through social interaction is important. Again, we go to school as adolescents in a group. You're not sitting at home alone reading a book in a corner. You're with others and you're learning from them. You're learning from what they say. You're learning from what they're doing. This is also interesting to think about it in terms of putting people in prison. Because again, if we're learning from our social context and the knowledge that we're learning through social interactions, if somebody's not that bad of a person, do you really want to put them in a situation where they're around the people that are horrible that they could be learning from? There's some criticisms of this theory. Go ahead and take a look at it. Also take a look at the zone of proximal development. It's the range of things that are too difficult to master alone, but you can get it with help of a peer or an adult. So we talked about Piaget with formal operations, Vygotsky with the zone of proximal development and social constructivism. Now we're on to the information processing theory, focusing on attention, memory, executive functioning, and critical thinking. Attention, this is concentration and focus and mental effort. Adolescents are so much better at attention than children in middle childhood or early childhood. They're having the ability for selective attention, divided attention, sustained attention, and executive attention. You will need to take a look at these four and know the differences between them. Selective, again, you can ignore things that are irrelevant and pay attention to things that are relevant. Divided attention, you can do more than one thing at the same time. Like some of y'all, when y'all are in class, you're on your phone and you're paying attention to me. I'm like, okay, they've developed divided attention. They can do both. Sustained attention, maintaining attention to things for a prolonged period of time. And executive attention is action planning, paying attention to goals, error detection and compensation, monitoring your progress, and dealing with novel or difficult circumstances. So adolescents have way more resources for attention than children do. We're processing things faster. When you hear a problem or when you hear a question, you're able to process it. You have a greater capacity for attention and a lot more automaticity. Things are automated, so certain things that you already know, you don't have to pay so much attention to, and you can process that quickly. They're more skilled at directing their resources. They can multitask, which may be negative. Again, think about texting and driving, not good. Increases in executive attention lead to increases in effortful control. So you have more executive attention. So guess what? When even though something is boring, like this video may be boring to you, but you can still kind of put enough effort into it and control your attentional resources to make sure that you get to the end because you know it's going to be on your test. Okay, I'm not going to go through memory because it's a whole chapter in Intro to Psychology. But you need to know that sensory memory, working memory, and long-term memory are important, and that there are specific increases in middle and late childhood that improve into adolescence. So we're getting better at memory. And because we've got attention and memory that are constantly getting better, executive functioning is also getting better. And our executive functioning, it's a higher order cognitive activities using cognitive control, decision making, critical thinking, creative thinking, and engaging in metacognition. These are all becoming better because it's associated with the prefrontal cortex of our brain. And the prefrontal cortex of our brain is becoming more mature, and it matures all the way up to age 25 or mid-20s. Cognitive control, make sure you know that it's making a real effort to stick with a task, even though it's hard. Cognitive control, it's thinking, stopping and thinking first before you act. Cognitive control, working on something that's important, even though it's boring. And also decision making is really important. It increases in adolescence. Older adolescents are better at decision making than younger ones. Impulsivity and sensation seeking may lead to less effective decisions. So if they're in a situation, they may be more likely to act on their impulses. Calm emotional state leads to better decisions, especially in adolescence. And our social context plays a role in making decisions. Also, you have to note that adolescents are given more of an opportunity to make decisions because they're getting into things like playing a sport or doing things, and they're picking their own little niche in what they're going to do. Critical thinking is also super important. It's thinking reflectively, reflecting on the past, thinking productively, and evaluating the evidence and determining whether or not something needs to change. Critical thinking is assisted by increased processing speed, automaticity, more breadth of knowledge, constructing new combinations of knowledge, spontaneous use of strategies for problem solving. Again, critical thinking only occurred in 43% of 11th graders, and maybe schools focus too much on formal reasoning and passive learning as opposed to helping children develop critical thinking. Critical thinking becomes developed by exposure to conflicting accounts of arguments and debates, controversial topic discussions, developing long-term approaches to long-term problems, and handling problems that have no single right answer. So a problem like, how do we solve poverty? Well, there's a lot of different ways and a lot of different strategies that we could use, but there's no one right answer and and multiple wrong answers. So that requires critical thinking and flexing those critical thinking muscles. Our next stage or our next domain is social emotional development, which is also really big in adolescence. There are lots of highs and lows of emotions among adolescents. The intensity of their emotions may seem disproportionate to the situation, and this is normal. Their biological changes and situations can contribute to their emotional moodiness or more emotional volatility that we could see in adolescence. Emotional competence is developing, and emotional competence is being able to cope with negative emotions in a healthy way, not yelling and unloading and venting on everyone, being aware that their emotional expression affects their relationships, that they can do something emotionally that would damage a relationship, not becoming overwhelmed by their emotions, being able to discern others' emotions. And self-understanding, it's an individual's cognitive representation of the self. So that's important. It's your sense of who you are, what makes you unique. And it's based in the different roles and memberships that you have. And you're becoming in adolescence, you're a part of a friend group, you're a part of a church group, you're a part of a family group, you're a part of all these different groups. And what is your role in the membership of all these different groups? Make sure that you take a look at abstraction and idealism, differentiation, the fluctuating self, and the contradictions. The real versus ideal self. Again, if your real self is way different from your ideal self, this could cause and lead to maladjustment. The possible self is what an individual might become, what they would like to become, what they are afraid of becoming. These, in adolescence, all these things are possible. And what's important is to distinguish between your true self and your false self. Your false self, again, it's kind of like putting up a front. I don't know if that word went out in the 90s, but fronting or putting up a front, behaving in a way or acting in a way that's not